Good evening, Toastmasters and our visiting guests at home. Welcome to TV Toastmasters Club 9523. Visit us at tvtoastmasters.com on the internet. And I'd like to begin our meeting for this evening. I am the presiding officer tonight, and I would like to welcome our very newest member, Theresa Ziolkowski, and Ben Garrett is visiting tonight, and he's taking on a role as timer tonight. The club news: Rick Barron will be in a contest as our evaluation contestant on Sunday, November the 15th. Tabletopics. What did I say? Evaluation? Tabletopics contest on Sunday, November the 15th. And we'd like to have everyone come out that can and encourage Rick as he competes. I'd like to introduce our Toastmaster this evening. Emily Garrett has been with us for a while, and she is an Advanced Communicator Gold, an Advanced Leader Bronze, and this is her second club, or are you in 3 clubs now?
I'm in 3.
She's in 3 clubs now. So let us welcome our Toastmaster this evening, Emily Garrett.
Woo! Thank you. Good evening and welcome to our November 5th meeting. I'm really excited to be here tonight because it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me. I've never remembered a birthday when it was 75 degrees out. So this is truly an amazing year. And I'm hoping the winter will hold out and be very similar to our weather that we've had this week. I have my fingers crossed. Tonight we have a great lineup. We have 2 speakers. We'll have table topics, and then we'll have evaluations of the speeches, and grammarian report and timer report. So without further ado, I'd like to call our word of the day grammarian up here, Carol Cormally.
Thank you, Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and our guests. The purpose of the word counter, the word power all counter grammarian, is to help us increase our vocabulary and I give a report when I'm called upon later by the general evaluator. Our word of the day today, it's on your agenda, and it's also up here. It's zippy. It's full of zip, very quick or speedy, such as a zippy sports car. And when people ask me, how are you? I'm going zippy and zesty. And it sort of lifts their energy level too. The trick is to use that when you come up to the lectern, use the word of the day. I will be counting ahs, ums, so's, buts, and you knows, lip smacks, and double clutches. And I will report at the end of the meeting. So be sure to use zippy, and if you want to use zesty also, but zippy. So let's have it to our zippy Toastmaster.
Thank you, Zippy Carol. One thing I really love about this club is that there are a lot of very seasoned members, and I don't consider myself one. And although it was very difficult at first to try to watch myself on YouTube, I could, if it wasn't taped or recorded, I could walk away thinking I was great when I really wasn't. And I love to see how I improve and how I hold up with these really great speakers, even though I feel like they're way better than I am. But I've gotten used to the camera, and it's fine, and it really helps me to learn what I want to do better. Next, in our impromptu session, is table topics. And this gives us a chance to speak on our feet and practice for those moments in a meeting at work when they say, "What do you think?" And we need to be ready with an answer, even though we didn't know what the question would be. So our table topics master tonight is Ben Garrett.
I have a theme tonight. It's kind of a sports theme. It's because of the World Series that was on Tuesday. So all of these are World Series related questions, but they should not be hard for anybody who's not a fan. the first question, do I have any volunteers for Tabletopics?
Just pick someone.
Steve, would you like to come up? The prompt is a New York Mets fan made a zippy decision with a world champs tattoo. Can you tell us of a time that you were disappointed? Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes.
A New York Mets fan jumped the gun or made a zippy decision with a world champs tattoo.
Okay.
Can you tell us of a time that you were disappointed?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Tabletopics Master, fellow Toastmasters, and our honored guests looking in from home. Well, obviously, they were disappointed because they didn't take the World Series, so he's got a tattoo now that's not correct. A time that I was disappointed. Actually, thinking about it and not digging too far back, or not too deeply in disappointments, I can think of a time that I was disappointed that I did not listen to my gut feelings. Being more scientific and intellectually oriented in the way that I approach things, I feel I should be able to come up with enough reasons to justify different things, and gut feelings are sort of these subtle feelings that you have that are trying to tell you something, but it's not hard quantitative information. You think, oh, I don't know what to do with that. I had been looking at a job, and I had actually decided to turn it down. And then I changed my mind and talked myself into taking it. It really turned out to be a pretty bad decision. But I was quite disappointed about that I had actually reversed my decision, and it turned out to be something that I probably shouldn't have done. So I was disappointed with that, and I think the biggest problem I have had to deal with that is learning to forgive yourself for having made a mistake. But it actually had some really good things come out of it, because that's when I actually quit working altogether and went back to graduate school and did some things that I'd been wanting to do for a long time. So sometimes we do have things that are a bad decision, and we have some regrets for it, but we do have to also take advantage of what we learned from it and go on. Mr. Tabletopics Master.
Thank you, Steve. Carol, I'd like to call you up. The Royals won the World Series for the first time on Tuesday since 1985. Can you tell us about one of your great accomplishments and its significance, or what it means to you? Carol Cormorant.
Thank you. I'm not a great sports fan, so I'm glad that I could segue into something else. My greatest significance that means something to me was surviving a marriage with my husband and I. We were two people at each other instead of two people against the world. And for 52 years, I learned, I didn't cope too well, but I learned that he was a good person, he was loyal, he had fidelity and integrity, and that he was a good person. Even if he didn't say nice things to me, he was a good person to keep. And so I survived 52 years of marriage, and fortunately, coming to Toastmasters, I learned how to deal with people who aren't kind. You don't have to reply in kind. If they say something nasty, you don't have to say something nasty back. You can thank them for being honest and that you value integrity, and you can be nice. And I put that to good use the last 6 years of his life when he had Alzheimer's, and I was able to be kinder and more gentle in the things that he said, because he used to always say things to get me riled up. And when he had Alzheimer's, and I didn't know the difference until the doctor gave him a prescription and said, come back with a family member to discuss your memory loss. So I learned, thanks to Toastmasters, I had a much better 6 years of coping with Alzheimer's than I would have had if I had not had Toastmasters. Mr. Tabletopics Master.
Thank you, Carol. Emily, I'd like to call you up. In 2004, the Boston Red Sox won the World Series for the first time since 1918, ending the curse of the great Bambino. Can you tell us of a time you were the underdog and overcame the odds? And what year?
I'm trying to think of, I feel like I'm always the underdog. I don't know if I overcome the odds. I guess
You could sit there.
I could say the odds were against me when I got married at age 16. I graduated high school that year as well, and so I feel like I really had a start out in the world that really was not well thought out or well prepared. And I had kids before I went to college, and when my first one was in kindergarten, that's when I went to college, and I've gone on and gotten my master's degree, got a decent job, and so I feel like that the odds really were against me at the start. I don't know what I was thinking, but that's what teenage brains, they don't work that well. You really have to wait for them to develop before you make big decisions. I'm really a firm believer in that at this point, and I would say that I overcame the odds in this instance and to get where I am today. I could have gotten there faster had I done it all in the right order. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Theresa, would you like to come up?
I'll try it.
Okay, come on up. The 2004 Boston Red Sox nicknamed David Ortiz Big Pappy. Tell us of someone you admire and why.
I've spent my life admiring everybody almost better than I did myself. I was one of these people with low self-esteem, and so it's like every situation I would go into, there would be somebody that I'd be admiring. But of all the people that I admired, and there really were a lot over my life, probably the person I admired the most was Dr. Tom Spey at Miami University. Dr. Spey was incredibly gifted as a teacher, but he not only taught in the classroom, he taught through his personal life. One of the things that he overcame was the fact that he married somebody, it was actually his second marriage, and she ended up dying of cancer. And during the time that she was dying, he was able to keep up being the department chair. He was able to keep up with counseling students. He was able to keep up being a father to a young daughter. And he took care of his wife. He was a fantastic role model for what it meant to be a loving husband, as well as somebody who was part of a university community. And so I would have to say that Dr. Spey was the person I admired most of anybody I've ever known.
Thank you, Theresa. Can I have our, do I turn over to the Toastmaster?
Thank you. Our next segment is our prepared speeches, and our new member, Theresa Ziolkowski, is going to give our first speech. It is Speaking to Inform, a fact-finding report, and the speech title is Sell the Steak and the Sizzle, Theresa Ziolkowski.
All of us have been in Toastmaster meetings for a while now, and one of the primary rules in Toastmasters that we learn is interpersonal communication. I've always felt that one of the most important rules is to only give information about yourself at the most general level at first. And then as you get to know somebody, then you can go deeper and deeper and deeper and really get to know somebody. But I'm going to violate all that tonight. I'm going to start out by telling you something that's very dear to my heart, actually two things that are dear to my heart, that are examples of times where I just said, oh my God, I'm going to fall apart entirely in front of this camera. Anyway, I'm going to give you two examples of times where I was outside of the norm. And every time I start to step outside of the norm and excel, or just outside of what people expect, I have a hard time coping with that. One of the things about me that you folks don't know is that I have 3 dogs. When you walk down the street with just one dog, people take that in stride. And when you have 2 dogs, people kind of give you a second look, but they take that in stride. But I can assure you, when you walk down the street with 3 dogs that are acting up and look like they're going to rip somebody else's dogs up, and they're barking at everybody you go by, and they're causing all kinds of trouble, you're outside of the norm. People will say things like, are all 3 of those dogs yours? Or I've had one person that say, do you realize that each of your dogs takes the ecological footprint of 2 SUVs, and you've got 3 of them? And I'm thinking, okay, so that means that these dogs are the equivalent of 6 SUVs, right? So I guess they're polluting. I guess that's the point of all that they're pooping and eating and, all these other things that dogs do. Okay, I can take that in stride. Or people will say, are you babysitting a dog? Because it's outside the norm. People don't expect you to have 3 or 4. My best friend from high school had 5 dogs, and maybe that's why she was my best friend, because we all fit in together. But another time that I've been outside the norm was with my occupation. My occupation was in business, and I was a business teacher during most of my career. I taught sales. And the minute you talk about sales, I can remember meeting my in-laws, and my father-in-law spoke with a sort of heavy Boston Polish accent, and he goes, are you a marketeer? And I thought, my gosh, that sounds like somebody that's a Blade Runner or something, like I'm running alcohol down the side street. And he goes, everybody in our family is an engineer. And I said, oh, and he goes, yes, my son, Jim, who's now my husband, he knew from first grade that he wanted to become a mechanical engineer. And he goes, I'm very proud of the fact that he went on and he became a nuclear engineer. And I myself am an aeronautical engineer, and Jim's twin brother, and then we're going through all these family members, and they're all engineers. And today, now when we go to these events at Duke Energy with my husband, everybody's an engineer. Everybody's like, oh, I got my engineering degree over at Tennessee, or I took the Tennessee engineering test and passed it on the first try. How about you? And I'll say, oh, I didn't take the test, I'm in marketing. And they're like, oh. And everybody that's has kids will say, oh my gosh, so-and-so's child's really smart, he's going into engineering. And when I taught personal selling and sales, I never thought about these things. What I thought about is the fact that it was a great way to make money. That's all I thought about. And we salespeople think simplistically. I think the money's green, that's all that matters. But it actually has other advantages as a career. And one of the things, when you compare it to something like engineering, is that an engineer has to be groomed to be an engineer from almost elementary school. You have to be good in mathematics from the time you're in about 4th or 5th grade so that you can get into the advanced math classes in junior high or middle school, so that you can be into calculus by the time you're in high school. So, the fact is, if you're not a genius in math by the time you're in 1st grade, you're kind of a washout for engineering. But, salespeople can be slow, late bloomers. I was a late bloomer. Maybe some of you in here were late bloomers too. And it's okay to be a late bloomer in sales. I myself was very late in choosing the sales career. I decided to go into sales when I was 21 years old. Now you compare that to a 1st grader who's 6. So you can see that I made the decision much later. But I can even give you instances of somebody who made the decision to go into sales even later than that. One of my friends from high school, when she was in graduate school, fell in love with a man from Pakistan. And he didn't even speak English. And they fell in love. They were in Europe someplace, and they decided to move back to my hometown. And there he was, married to my friend, and he barely spoke English. The only business connection that he had was his father-in-law, who owned an ice cream store. And he thought, now what can I do to earn a living? And he decided to go to professional sales. And he sold refrigerators and appliances for a company called Rex. I don't know if you ever heard of it. And Roberts. They used to have a branch of that north of Cincinnati. And his income went up and up and up to the point where they are now the wealthiest family in town. They own a 10,000 square foot house. They've hired in people from my high school class to do a lot of the construction. The front of their home has this huge pond, lake type thing with this waterfall in front of it. And he's even had enough money to redo the house of the guy who ran the ice cream store. Just one quick finishing thought about the sizzle of the sales career. This handout is comparing sales to mechanical engineering. I decided to look the two occupations up just to see how this looked. And if you look at the first column, the salary range, we have the top 10%, the 75th, median 25th, and bottom 10%. The middle column looks at engineering, and the right column looks at sales. The way you would look at this, if you're newly graduated, you're going to be at the bottom 10% of the occupation. And as you can see in engineering, at the very bottom, well, an engineer does make a whale of a salary compared to an entry-level salesperson. Huge difference. You go to the next level, still a big difference. Third level, still a big difference. But all of a sudden, if you start to look at the top 25% or the top 10%, suddenly the sales career starts to look a lot better. So if you can hang in there and last to, say, 5 years out, 10 years out, or 15 years out, suddenly the sales career has a lot more earning potential than those mechanical engineers. So to sum up, I believe the sizzle of sales really is two things. You can enter at almost any point in your life, and then if you look at it as a long-term investment in yourself, you can make a really good income. It's also the stake. I mean, let's face it, even if you're only making $27,000 a year as a basic salary coming out of college, that isn't ridiculously low. It's maybe not something you're bragging to your friends about, but it's still a very nice salary that somebody could comfortably have a roommate and live in an apartment. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Let's take a minute so our evaluator can make notes. It's always interesting when we have two speeches back to back that are the same project from the same manual. This is the advanced manual. This is this one, Speaking to Inform. And to see the way two different people take that speech and that project and what they do with it. So our next speaker is doing the same project, the fact-finding report. Rick Barron has been a certified scuba diver since 1999 and received his training to dive in an overhead environment in 2001. His speech today will share his research of American cave diving fatalities, and it's called Rules, Rules, Everywhere Rules. Rick Barron.
Thank you, Emily. Why so many rules? In life, what we discover is that rules were created for a reason. And in cave diving, rules were created to save lives. When cave diving, there are essentially 6 hazards that divers experience that they don't normally experience in open water. The first of which is zippy water. Water that's going through those caves tends to go very quickly. In addition, there can be low or no visibility. All it takes is a misplaced fin to totally silt out the cave, and it's impossible to see where you're going. The third hazard, confusing number of possible exits. These were not built by engineers. These were built by Mother Nature, and there could potentially be a number of different ways for the diver to get to the surface. The fourth is that there can be restrictions. The cave narrows at times to very, very small openings that divers literally have to take their gear off and slide it through to be able to make it through that opening. The fifth one, entanglement. Most divers have a line that they follow, and getting tangled in that line can result in a fatality. And the final hazard is the overhead environment itself. The diver cannot go directly to the surface when there's an emergency. There are a number of rules designed to help divers survive the overhead environment. The first one is there must be a continuous guideline to open water. The second one is they should only penetrate the cave using 1/3 of their gas supply. 1/3 in, 1/3 out, 1/3 for your buddy in case they need the air on the way out. The third rule is limit your depth to the type of gas that you select. The fourth one is to make sure that you are trained to be in the overhead environment. And the fifth one is to bring at least 3 lights that will last for the duration of the dive. You do not know dark until you turn off the lights in an underwater cave. That's dark. The research that I'm going to share with you today is from an article published in the International Journal of Aquatic Research and Education in 2009. It analyzed the cave diving deaths between 1969 and 2007 to be able to help provide some insight into what divers should pay attention to and to help reinforce some of those rules that I just shared with you. Some basic observations from the data. There were 368 cave diving fatalities during that time period. 95% of them were males. 90% of those deaths were in the United States. Of the deaths that were in the United States, 87% of them were in the state of Florida. And the majority of them, 39% of the ones that were in the United States, happened in 3 cave systems in Florida. Of the 275 where the diver had a known occupation, 32% were students and 12% was U.S. military. The young and the foolish? I don't know, right? 20% of those deaths were by cave-trained divers. 20% of those deaths were cave-trained divers. Some observations. The number of deaths that has occurred in caves has been decreasing over time, but the proportion of those deaths attributed to cave-certified divers has been increasing over that time. For untrained divers, they were most likely to break the continuous guideline rule, the 3 light rule, and the rule of thirds, resulting in their death. The primary cause of death, regardless of whether you were trained or untrained, obviously was drowning, right? But the primary difference between trained and untrained divers, older divers were more likely to be cave certified. Cave-trained divers were less likely to dive in a manner which broke the continuous line rule. They understand the importance of having that line to make it back out to open water. But cave-trained divers were more likely to die alone than in multiple death incidents. The intent of the research was not to claim that cave training has helped decrease the number of dive deaths. The focus was on helping to bring some insights for those divers so that they can reinforce the fact that the rules are there for a reason. The rules were there to save lives. 76% of divers that ran out of gas did so after getting lost when they were certified. Getting lost, taking a wrong turn. I told you in many cases there are multiple exits, right? So paying strict attention to that line and the way out of the cave. Diving with insufficient gas for the dive that you had planned was the second most likely reason that trained divers die in caves. Not bringing adequate gas for the dive that was planned and taking a wrong turn in the cave on the way out. Two most important reasons why certified divers perish. Training does appear to affect getting lost. And untrained divers are significantly more likely to dive without that continuous guideline. In summary, 5 rules associated with cave diving. The continuous guideline to the surface, the rule of thirds, a third in, a third out, a third for your buddy, limiting your depth to the gas mix that you've selected, being cave trained, and bringing 3 forms of illumination. When you break a rule, it is much more likely to result in a cave accident. As a cave trained diver, what I have learned by doing this research is 2 things. Number 1, gas planning is one of the most important aspects to make sure that I am carrying enough gas to make it in and out of the cave. The second one is to practice the line skills, because in many cases there are multiple lines going through the cave. And as cave divers, we're giving little arrows that we can use to attach onto the line when we choose to take a turn off of the main line. That arrow has our initials on it, and in many cases it should be carved with our initials so that we can find that pointer in the dark. And it should point to the way out of the cave when it's attached to the line. Rules, rules, everywhere rules. In this case, rules save lives. Ms. Toastmaster.
Thank you. Let's take a minute for the evaluators to write some notes. It's me.
Name an effective political leader in history who couldn't speak well. There aren't any.
Because when it comes to a disease,
Freedom requires leadership, and leadership requires oratory. You have to speak to be heard.
I have a dream.
It's all about personal growth and guts.
Never give in. Never, never, never.
And we're back. The next portion of our meeting is the evaluation portion. We'll have the evaluators for each speaker, and then the timers report and the grammarian reports after that. So our first evaluator, evaluating Theresa's speech, is Steve Aaronholtz.
Thank you, Madam General Evaluator, fellow Toastmasters, our honored guest looking in from home, and Theresa. A fact-finding report. Sell the steak and the sizzle. The purpose of the talk was for the speaker to deliver a fact-finding report of 5 to 7 minutes on a situation, event, or problem. I thought your opening was really interesting. It caught my attention because I have 2 dogs, and so I've never heard about them consuming or producing a footprint the size of 2 SUVs. That's pretty substantial for a 15-pounder and a 20-pounder. I thought, wow, I would have liked to have known a little bit more about that. I think that would have been really interesting. I thought that your opening was a little bit slow for your presentation. I think that you could have tied in the example of having the 3 dogs and that it's a little bit different from what you normally experience with people out walking their dogs, and I don't know what kind of dogs you have, so I couldn't judge as to how the mayhem that was going on that you were describing and that people were commenting about had as far as steak and sizzle. My first thought was, well, obviously some of these people aren't pet people, but I think that as you got into your speech and you were talking about your choice for career having been made later in life versus people like your husband's family that they knew what they wanted to be before they even really started school, is interesting because I think there's a lot more of us that are still wondering what we're going to be when we grow up, rather than some of the people that are there when they start school. But I think that what would have supported your speech a little bit more strongly, and with selling the steak with the sizzle, is offer us maybe a couple other career paths too for comparison. Because I know I work with engineers, I've met engineers. They're a certain type of individual versus physicians, which I also work with. So I think that it might have supported your argument a little bit better if you'd have given us 1 or 2 other examples. And that these can be quite divergent because there's also engineers that finish engineering school and go into something totally different. So I think that that would have bolstered your position that you were presenting. I was a little bit at a loss in this project when they talked about question and answer period, and the Toastmaster didn't introduce anything with that either, so I couldn't really evaluate you on that portion of this. I think that you had a really interesting topic. I think it's something a lot of people can relate to, and I enjoyed your opening story, but I think that maybe tying it together a little more tightly and giving us a couple of other examples. The sheet that you gave us was nice because it gave us some real specifics, but I think you could have really supported it if you would have thrown in another 1 or 2 examples. Madam General Evaluator.
The Toastmaster apologizes for not letting everyone know there was a question and answer part. It was not on my agenda, and I have the book for Rick's project, and I see that it's in there now. Was not aware. But on the other hand, the speakers could have said, were there any questions? So, that being said, our next evaluation is I am evaluating Rick's speech. And although this was a fact-finding type of speech, I found it very interesting. It was very colorful with the descriptions. It was very well organized with the 6 hazards, then the rules, and then which rules people break, and then the middle of the speech had all the research with the numbers. And I was thinking when you said that 32% of the people who died diving were students in Florida, and my son was a student in Florida that was diving. I'm glad I didn't hear your speech before he went there. It went on to, Rick reinforced all of the facts and the rules about, let's see, with the important reasons, which ones were most likely to result in a fatality. And so as far as organization, it was very clear, and I was easily able to follow everything you're saying, even though I've never scuba dived and I don't know any of this stuff. It was all in terminology that I understand. I like that when you're talking about something that the audience doesn't know anything about, that you're speaking our language so that we know what you're talking about. There were no visual aids. I was trying to think of what would have been good, because the descriptions were, I was easily able to imagine being down there, and maybe because I watch a lot of Flipper episodes, I'm not sure. But I don't know, there may have, I don't know what pictures would have been helpful to really make a point. It was very well prepared. The research had a time period on it and lots of numbers. And I guess, even though it's a fact-finding report, I always love to hear a little personal anecdote in there somewhere, if you had had one. Although you had my attention, if you'd had a personal experience that, where maybe you had a close call or something, because I know you've done a lot of adventures under the sea, that would have been good. And the question and answer I can't talk about because we didn't have that part, unfortunately. It was very well explained, and I really did enjoy it, and learned a lot from it. I guess and back to me. Our next evaluation is the grammarian report with Carol, with Zippy Carol.
You get credit for that. I had a fairly easy night tonight. I didn't have too many ums and ahs and different things. I've used the word of the day 2 times when I was explaining it. Emily used the word of the day 2 times. Ben once. I didn't hear Steve use the word of the day. Did you? No, you didn't. Teresa, I didn't hear you use it. And Rick used the word of the day 1 time, zippy. And I'll give a zippy report here. We had, Emily, you had hardly any ums and ahs during your Toastmastering. As you were doing your evaluation while you were thinking, you had 3 buts, 4 so's, 8 uhs, which you didn't have any when you were doing Toastmastering, 5 ands, and you had 4 where you started I. You started to say I something, and you did that 4 different times, but that wasn't very bad at all. Ben, I only heard 2 ums, 2 uhs, 3 so's, and 1 but beside your word of the day. That was very good. Steve, I heard 4 so's, 1 but, 1 1 lip smack, 1 I, and I thought a good use of your grammar was when you used the word quantitative. I thought that was very good. That was significant. And Theresa, I heard only 4 so's and 1 you know. Very good. Rick, 1 word of the day, and you said 12% was what it should have been. 12% of the divers were, because in other times when you're saying the percent, you did use the word. 1 lip smack. That was all I heard with you. That is my grammarian report for today, and keep up the good lack of ums and ahs.
Thank you. Our next evaluation is our timer report with Ben.
First word table topics. Steve's table topic was 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Carol's was 1 minute and 31 seconds. Emily's was 1 minute and 17 seconds. Teresa's was 1 minute and 4 seconds. So they were all within good time. Speaker number 1, Theresa, was supposed to be between 7 and 10 minutes, and it was 8 minutes and 17 seconds. Rick Barron, speak number 2, supposed to be between 7 and 10 minutes and was 9 minutes, 2 seconds. Evaluator number 1 was 3 minutes and 32 seconds, which it should have been 2 to 3 minutes with 30-second leeway, so it was just a couple seconds over that. Evaluator number 2 should have been the same, and it was 3 minutes and 5 seconds. Madam Toastmaster.
Thank you. Well, I thought this was a great meeting. We had 2 great speeches. Our table topics were very on target with our baseball week. We've had a lot of sports news around the country this week and last week. And our word of the day, zippy, pretty easy to use. I hear Carol use that quite a bit. It's one of her favorites. Theresa, I really liked your speech. My father was a salesman and my brother is in sales, and so it was very interesting to me to see the difference. I know in sales, it's all about how well you do as to whether you're employable. If you're a great salesperson, they don't really care how you do it as long as it's legal. And I saw one of our well-to-do car dealers in town was a keynote speaker at a graduation I went to, and he said as he was trying to decide what he wanted to do in life, he was working, I think he was in parts, and he was working with dealers. And he said the thing he noticed about them was that they weren't exceptionally bright, but they were exceptionally rich. And that was his goal. He wanted to be rich, and that's why he became a car dealer. And you said it was for the money. I think that's got to be the goal, really, to be great at sales. But I really enjoyed your speech. I thought it was very interesting with the comparison with the engineers. Very different personalities, sales and engineering. And the scuba diving, like I said in my evaluation, I enjoyed that. I understood it, and it was very colorful, picturing the caves and under the water. Although I will never do that, never. Just the thought of having to depend on this for air just is too much for me. Our grammarian, as usual, was right on target, paying attention to every word that was extra, every extra word. Here I am, don't count any of this, luckily. I think I heard Rick say drowning instead of drowning. Oh, I don't know if I heard that correctly. And the timer report, thanks Ben for a good job on timing and for being a guest and playing a role in our meeting. I think everything went well. We're back in the studio tonight. It's great to be back, isn't it? Feels like home. And I will turn the meeting over to our presiding officer, Zippy Carroll.
Thank you. I thought the meeting went well. Ben, as our guest, would you have any comments about our meeting tonight, if you'd like to come up?
I don't have any comments.
You don't have any comments? Okay. And Theresa, as a new member? No comments? Okay. I will conclude the meeting. I thought we had a good meeting. I enjoyed the speeches. I learned quite a bit. I always learn from the speeches. And what I like about them, most of the speakers talk about something they're passionate about. So it's always a very good speech that you're listening to because there's personal knowledge in there. With that, I thank everyone for being here. Be sure to sign up for the next meeting. We have the sign-up sheet somewhere, back there. And I conclude the meeting, I adjourn the meeting of Toastmasters TV TM 9523. Meeting adjourned.